Yellowstone Season 5, Episode 7 has aired, and as a therapist, I'm going to take you beneath the surface. I'm going to take you underneath the action and the words and try to show you, hey, here's the psychology going on that you might not have caught at first. I can tell you, just because I've watched the whole show up to this point, the whole series up to this point, there's so much psychology that's going on that they geniusly put in there, but they don't really put the spotlight on it. So I hope in this breakdown we can do that together, as you can see what's happening beneath the surface in the minds of these characters that might explain why they do certain things, why they say certain things. And I can tell you the whole series, it's pretty realistic insofar as not every person, really not any person that I know of personally, has all good traits or all bad traits. So in some movies or shows, there are characters that like just totally 100%, they're the good guy and they're fighting against this totally 100% bad guy. Well, that's just not life. Every human, we all have positive traits, negative traits. We all have these selfish ambitions and motivations that most of us probably try to manage or suppress. And we also have plenty of good traits that we also want to keep growing and contributing to other people. And we have our own interests in mind, our own people we're trying to take care of. Sometimes we can come across looking like a bad guy. Other times we can come across looking like a good guy. But it's rare that we're always one or the other. And that's how the show works, is that the good guys that we love, the quote unquote good guys that we love, they do some pretty terrible things. But also the bad guys that we love to hate on the show, most of them have been developed to the point where we see, okay, they're not just totally evil. I see their point of view. I see where they're coming from. Might not agree with that, but I see where they're coming from. So I love the psychological angle, but let's dive right into the first scene. And this is a flashback scene where Rip is young and still just trying to learn how to navigate life on the ranch. And he and this other cowboy named Rowdy have an argument about Beth. Obviously, Rowdy has said some things that Rip didn't like about Beth. And Rip reveals consistently that he's a defender. Rip is loyal to almost a fault sometimes, but if you look at the Enneagram, I think Rip would be considered an Enneagram 6, wing 5, and those are literally known as the defenders. Defenders are always going to believe in themselves and their ability to make decisions, and they don't need to rely on other people to figure out what they need to do, or at least that's how they operate mentally. They tend to prioritize security, safety, reassurance, and they tend to turn inward to look for those answers of how to achieve those things. But in relationships with other people, they don't really focus on building a support structure because they are so self-reliant. That can come in handy sometimes, can be harmful sometimes, but in Rip's case, he fits this mold perfectly because he really never has sought after a support network. And then later in the show, once he finds it, he realizes what an advantage it is and how good it feels. But up until now, he's just doing life on his own, and he's learned to trust himself to make those decisions. So Rip lives up to that defender title in the Enneagram because he relies on himself, he's independent, and once he decides something is either right or wrong, he goes after it. He doesn't waste a bunch of time getting other people's opinions, he just takes action. So for better or for worse, that's who Rip is, and I think his character really does portray the Enneagram 6, wing 5 really well. So in this flashback scene, when Rip literally beats the life out of Rowdy, we see those characteristics at play. He is going to defend Beth's honor, Beth's reputation. I think also in the back of his mind, he's defending the ranch because Beth is one of the owners of the ranch. He's also defending John, who he is starting to see as a father figure. I mean, John took him in when he, to all rights, should have been dead or taken off to jail. Didn't have a family of his own because of his dad's own abusive and murderous behavior. So I think in Rip's mind, he's defending what's right. And then when it comes time to have to tell John what happened, even though Rowdy told him, hey, just lie about how my death happened or how my injury happened at that point. Rowdy told him it was the cowboy code. You don't have to take the fall for this. Just tell him that my horse trampled me. But Rip has that deep sense of loyalty, that deep sense of dependability, and it's his duty to tell the truth. John even told him, don't ever lie to me. And John even said, why didn't you lie to me about this? Why didn't you just tell me that the horse trampled Rowdy? And Rip said, well, you told me never to lie to you. And so right there in that moment, we see some awesome traits from Rip. He's a man of his word. He is who he is. He's never going to try to deceive you. And then also we see John and John's need for control. There's some good traits to this, and we'll get to it in a second, but John has a very much of a need to know what everybody is doing, to micromanage, to do things his way. Now, he's probably not choosing this all the time. This is probably how he was raised, and I think the prequel series are showing that does get passed down. There's this whole family dynamics, family system where generationally personality traits can get passed down. So I think John has definitely inherited those, and they're on display right here. So when John starts to help him get out of this mess, he says, all right, I'll help you get out of this, but you have to do exactly what I say from this point on. And of course, we know that leads to things like the branding and the lifelong contract, unofficial contract with Rip and the ranch and John. So John's controlling, he's got that need for it, but we zoom out for a second from a psychological perspective, and we know if we can't trust somebody, we can't be in a relationship with somebody. Whether this is a friendship, a romance, just a family member, what have you, trust has to be one of the foundational elements of that relationship. And if there is no trust, then you can't get close to somebody. You can keep them as maybe an acquaintance, but John knows that he has to be able to trust somebody to bring them into his inner circle. So our brain, it really does the same thing. Our brain is looking to keep us safe from physical harm, safe from emotional harm, whatever it thinks might be a threat. It's going to move away from whatever that is, typically, and it's going to move toward safety, security, predictability, certainty. Because if it knows that something is predictable, if it can predict what's going to happen with a person, in other words, if this person is trustworthy, then your brain is going to allow you to move toward that person. If your brain senses that something's just not right, something's kind of off, even if you can't really explain it, your brain is going to send these signals to your body it's going to make you feel kind of, you can't put a finger on it, but something's just not right. That's your brain telling you, hey, we don't know exactly what it is, but we see a threat, and we're going to move away from the uncertainty of what might happen here. We're going to move towards something that's more certain somewhere else. So that's the dynamic we see going on with John and Rip in this moment, is that trust is being built and that certainty in one another is being established. And it is no coincidence that the very next scene cuts to Jamie. So we move from Rip and John developing trust, developing a closeness, developing a level of intimacy. Then we cut straight to Jamie, and he lacks all of that with John. So it's this very, very stark comparison, this contrast between Rip and Jamie. So in the modern day, Jamie is basically showing that he needs a therapy session. Unfortunately, the pseudo-therapist that he's chosen is Sarah, who, I don't know about you guys, I don't trust her a bit. And I've heard from other viewers and other people watching that, of course, they don't trust her, but Jamie has just made himself a punching bag for this woman. And we'll get into how she's manipulating him psychologically in a minute. But first of all, in this, basically what this conversation should be is handled in a therapist's office. Jamie is saying, look, all I ever wanted was the approval of my dad. And he is now rejecting me for the thing that he created. In other words, he made me be this lawyer. I wanted to be a cowboy. I wanted to enjoy the horses and the ranch and live the same life that my siblings and all the ranch hands get to live. But my dad forced me down this path of becoming a lawyer because that's what John needed. He needed certain people in certain positions to advance the family, to keep the ranch safe, what have you. At least that's how John would probably justify it. But Jamie is now stuck in this situation of who am I? Because I want to be this and yet I'm that. And who approves of me? And that question of who approves of me is such a common question for all of us. And especially for so many fathers and sons, so many sons need to know that their dad is proud of them, that their dad loves them, that their dad takes delight in them. And the show hasn't really revealed how the growing up years were between John and Jamie in those early years after he was adopted. But man, right now, there is absolutely no connection. There is the answer of no, I don't approve of you. I don't want you around. I don't love you. I don't delight in you. Those are big scars for anyone. And especially in Jamie's case, being adopted, there's just no foundation of identity. There's no foundation of security and belonging, because we got to have that sense of belonging and approval along with knowing who we are. So He literally says, I just want my dad's approval. Well, cue in Sarah with her manipulative mind. And Sarah, being the genius that she is, finds traits inside Jamie that she can exploit as weaknesses. They are, number one, his need for approval. Number two, his ambition. And number three, his hormones. So, first of all, his need for approval, she sees right through that. She knows that if Jamie can't get approval from his dad, then I'm going to offer myself as the source of approval. I'm going to offer our relationship as his safe space, as the spot where I can unconditionally accept you and we're together, and how dare you accuse me of any false motives. She's really good. She's really convincing. However, Jamie can't see through it because of these three things. So there's need for approval. She's definitely playing into that. His ambition. His ambition could stand alone on its own because he definitely has this desire to rise the ranks, to be recognized, to be powerful, to make a name for himself. So he has wanted to be governor. Sarah saw that from the beginning on that TV screen during the big celebration after John's election. So she saw that need, and she's going straight to that like an arrow. So his need for climbing that ladder, the ambition, is what she's playing right into by saying, hey, I can get you to be governor. And I even shivered when she says, ask me to help you get to governor. It's like, oh my gosh, this is an abuser just forcing or manipulating, just tricking the victim into thinking that they're actually along for the ride on their own free will, that this was the victim's idea, not the abuser's idea. It's just bone-tinglingly disgusting. And lastly, hormones are another way that Sarah's taking advantage of Jamie. Because here's what happens. Just think blood flow for a second. When we get aroused, we get turned on, the blood flow that normally is in our prefrontal cortex flows down to the parts of our body that get activated when we get aroused. Problem is, our prefrontal cortex is responsible for analytical thinking, for logic, for making the right decisions, seeing clearly. So Sarah understands that if you get somebody turned on, they don't think clearly anymore. And as a therapist, I'm telling you, it's because the blood flow moves away from the prefrontal cortex, which basically shuts it down. And it's why you're thinking with the wrong body part. So Sarah knows what she's doing. Unfortunately, Jamie, and it's sad to see Jamie becoming a participant in his own destruction. Next, we see Rip and John talking about this process of the cattle herd. And Rip, true to himself as a defender, he is focused on safety, security, certainty, predictability, all that. And so he says, look, I'm just going to be happy when this is over. Once I know that everything's worked out fine, the cattle are safe and the people are safe, that's when I can rest and enjoy. John, on the other hand, tells Rip, I actually get sad when I see the cattle herd starting to work out well because it makes me sad to know that it's coming to an end, that it's over. So right here you see two different mindsets, two different perspectives on some sort of a challenge or some sort of life, and you can figure out which one are you. When a challenge or a process is ahead of you, are you more of a destination person or are you more of a journey person? We need both. We need people that are really focused on the vision, the future. How do we get here? And then we need people that are really focused on the journey. People that can enjoy the details, people that can really be in the moment and actually have fun even when challenges are coming. So are you more like Rip, who enjoys things once they've turned out smoothly? Or are you more like John, who seems to really thrive off of conflict, maybe some drama? He almost can't be happy when things are calm. So are you more like him, where you enjoy the ride and you're kind of sad when it's over, even if the ride was a bumpy one? Now we move to Monica. And I have to tell you, I didn't like Monica up until this season. I thought she was just too negative and mopey all the time, and I know a lot of viewers felt the same way. But this season, they've actually written her in a way that she's got some toughness, she's got some backbone, and she's got more of an optimistic viewpoint of her future, even an optimistic viewpoint of the challenges she's going through in the moment. And I love the scene, the interaction that she has with Beth, because she asks Beth this what seems like a plain question on the surface, but it's really a penetrating question, and that is, Beth, why are you so mean? And she's really asking the deep root issues, like, what is it? What happened to you? What is it about the way you grew up? What is it inside you that causes this meanness to come out? And of course, we know that from watching the previous seasons, Beth has endured at least 3 major life traumas. First one is the death of her mother and actually seeing that happen. And then the way that it happened is number 2, she was blamed for it. She was blamed for it by her own mother as her mother was dying. There's just no way to describe what that does to a little girl and how that affects the brain, how that affects the nervous system permanently. I mean, you can heal somewhat from that, but there are just some injuries in there, some scars that happened in Beth because of that moment that I just don't think will fully ever heal. So those are the first 2 traumas, mother's death, being blamed for it. And then number 3, when she was a teen, of course, we know Jamie took away her ability to have children. So, and as a man, I can only even begin to fathom what it's like for a woman to have to experience that. But that tragedy, that hardship is how she and Monica start to bond even tighter. You know, there's certain tragedies and traumas that we go through that nobody else can really understand them or empathize with them other than the people who have also gone through them. So something like losing a child or the ability to have a child, that becomes a close-knit family, a family nobody asked for, but people that have lost children like that, they fully bond with each other on a level that nobody else can bond with them. And that's what you see happening here. Monica gets the empathy that, John tried to give her that same empathy earlier in this season, but there's just something about the way that Beth connected with her that truly made Monica feel even more accepted, more understood, and therefore even safer. We come back to Jamie, who's about to walk into his office, but thankfully his assistant, Kate, she shows herself to be really the only person that has Jamie's best interest in mind. And she takes a risk by speaking up. I mean, she works for Jamie. This could be something that would infuriate Jamie in her mind, or this is just kind of she's stepping out of her job role and playing more of the friend, saying, "Hey, I don't think it's a good idea that you're with Sarah." And she uses this quote that I think was one of my favorite quotes of the episode. She says, "Women know women, and men know what a woman wants them to know." And I can tell you in my own experience and in conversations with other men, this definitely feels true to us, but I want to hear from the ladies. Is this actually true? Or how true is this? How often is this true? Ryan and Abby have this heartbreaking conversation because Ryan's going off to do some cowboying, taking the cattle down to Texas. Abby wants him to stay, and she can't understand what's pulling him toward that life. And Ryan explains it so well to her. He says, when you sing, how fulfilled you feel, how amazing you feel, that's how I feel when I'm cowboying. So he says, basically, cowboying is my singing. He talks about her dream of being on the Grand Ole Opry, and he says this trip is his dream. And that topic is such an essential topic for us individually. And the psychology underneath that is purpose, meaning, passion. And the research is clear on this. When you don't have a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning in your life, or something that you're passionately pursuing in order to contribute to, in order to be bigger than yourself, you just feel empty. Your mental health suffers, your cognitive functioning suffers, and your emotions are generally negative. So I'm so glad they brought up this topic in the show, and I wish they would have spent more time on it, because so often we make the assumption that the potential partner is our purpose. And she even alludes to this. She says, "I get it. I just wish that I was your dream." And I wish they would have played that out a little more, because a lot of times people end up even getting married because the person they think that they're married, the person they marry, and they think that's their dream. And it feels that way for a while because all those emotions are still going. But after a while, the emotions wear off, life gets hard, and we realize, oh yeah, some other person isn't built to be my dream. They can't handle that kind of weight. That's a crushing weight. And so we got to have something bigger than ourselves, something bigger than the both of us that hopefully together we can pursue together. And I think this scene starts to hint at that. But the question becomes to all of us, what is our singing? What is our cowboying? Toward the end of the episode, Summer starts to come around. She says, look, I may not agree with this lifestyle. I may not be ordering meat anytime soon, but I understand. And I love that. I love that because there's so much rhetoric these days that's divisive and everybody trying to get their way across. But in this case, she lived life on life. She saw, she started to understand a different perspective. And she even told John, hey, you need to do this more. You need to show people who you are and show you. And she even told John, hey, you need to do this more. You need to bring people in closer to you and show them who you are and why you do certain things. So I love that idea of like, hey, let's build connection, let's build relationships, and we'll probably start to move a little closer toward one another. And Yellowstone overall hits that theme pretty consistently without beating us over the head with it. But this idea of the bad guy isn't all bad, the good guy isn't all good. So if we could just build some relationships and see where the other person's coming from and understand, we don't have to agree on everything, but if we understand and we appreciate each other, we can actually start to move closer in each other's directions rather than trying the divisive rhetoric that just keeps people on the opposite extremes shouting with no relationship. And finally, the episode wraps up with Jamie going fully to the dark side. It's clear that he's no longer trying to make any efforts toward John or the rest of the family. He has accepted, this is my role, and I'm coming at them with full fire. And I think, and this is just me as a therapist talking, I think I noticed some hint of revenge in his heart and his eyes. And I think that's maybe going to become his biggest motivation, even bigger than the ones we talked about earlier, the ones that Sarah is really hitting into. I think the idea of revenge is really, really tempting for Jamie here. And it's tempting for any of us who have been hurt. We think that somehow when we take revenge, it's going to make us feel better. It's going to even the score, but really just does more damage both to the people around us, the situation, and really just leaves us even more injured and empty on the inside. So I'm as a viewer, I'm interested to see kind of where this whole thing with Jamie goes, but as a therapist, I'm like, oh no, I know where this is going. So we'll see how it turns out. And I think, and this is just me as a therapist talking, I think I noticed some hint of revenge in his heart and his eyes. And I think that's maybe going to become his biggest motivation, even bigger than the ones we talked about earlier, the ones that Sarah is really hitting into. I think the idea of revenge is really, really tempting for Jamie here. And it's tempting for any of us who have been hurt. We think that somehow when we take revenge, it's going to make us feel better. It's going to even the score, but really just does more damage both to the people around us, the situation, and really just leaves us even more injured and empty on the inside. So I'm as a viewer, I'm interested to see kind of where this whole thing with Jamie goes, but as a therapist, I'm like, oh no, I know where this is going. So we'll see how it turns out. And now as a bonus, we'll talk a little bit about the psychology in 1923. The pilot episode aired right after Yellowstone season 7. And I can tell you right now, trauma and PTSD are all over this episode. Dramatic scene. And from the very opening scene, Helen Mirren's character, Cara Dutton, she kills a man. There's not really an explanation of the backstory, it just cuts straight to that. She has to hustle to get her ammunition reloaded before he does. She gets the shot off, kills him, and it could have just cut away right after that shot, but here's where the trauma comes in. And I don't know if this was scripted or not, but I thought it was just genius because it's so realistic. You can immediately tell she's not a cold-blooded killer. She doesn't enjoy killing. And so after a few seconds after, she's in shock. She drops her gun. She takes a few breaths, and it's almost like this all hits her all at once, and she just lets out this primal scream. And then it cuts to the credits to start the show, and I thought, wow, they purposely showed the pain, the internal pain that the shooting caused her. In other words, they showed the initial effects of the trauma. Because not only do you receive trauma when something happens to you, but a lot of times trauma occurs in your body when you do something that's shocking or violent. So I loved that it really did give the glimpse into this woman who, she didn't want to do this thing, but she had other priorities, and so she had to take actions that were just gut-wrenchingly painful for her. And then Spencer's character is just a poster boy for PTSD. We see him riding on a train, and he's dreaming and having flashbacks of the war and all the horrific, just bloody, murderous acts that he had to witness and do himself, and all the violence that happened to him. It's just horrifying at what we see. But then we see the PTSD, the flashback element come into play when the train conductor, shakes him and wakes him up in the same kind of a manner that was happening to him in the dream, in the flashback. And his immediate instinct is to pull the gun. That's what trauma does to us. We are constantly in fight or flight mode, even if we don't know it. And really, he's in both at this point, because he pulls the gun. That's the violent act, of course. And then he calms down, if you remember in the episode. But the conductor says, hey, you're at your destination. Spencer says, I'm not at my destination. I don't have a destination. I'm just at my next stop. And that is the flight part of fight or flight. The guy's constantly on the run. He's running away from the memories. He's running away from his past. So he just keeps on moving to the next spot, the next spot, the next spot. No rest, just constantly exhausted, trying to outrun this trauma. And a lot of people know the modern day version of that. They might not have been through as horrific of events as Spencer did in this show, but that feeling of just trying to get away from these past events, these past thoughts, these emotions, it really does feel like you're this drifter, this wanderer who doesn't have a home, doesn't have a destination, just constantly on to the next thing. And Spencer is trying to find meaning for his pain. He's trying to find purpose in his pain. So he's taken his skills, his violent skills, and it looks like, from what we can tell, he's using them to help people. He's using them to track down and hunt predator animals. And Spencer's looking to find meaning in his pain. Spencer's looking to find meaning in his pain. He's looking to find purpose in his pain, a greater meaning, a greater purpose for the painful events that he's gone through. So he takes these violent skills that he's acquired, and now it seems like he's trying to go to these places to actually help people. He's trying to help them hunt these wild animals that are killing tourists. And his skills are valued, so he feels wanted. Obviously his skills are effective, so he derives a sense of meaning, of value, of confidence from it. And it's interesting that he seems to have two guys that come along with him, and so they found a common purpose together, even in their pain. We don't know their backstory, but even in Spencer's pain, he knows that he still needs people around him. But it's also interesting that he's, for whatever reason, he's keeping both a physical and emotional distance from his family back home. He's not returning to them since the war ended. He feels like, for whatever reason, he has to purge himself of his past. He has to heal. Whatever his motives are, we don't know yet. And of course, the episode ends. Do we even get to see Spencer anymore? That'll be the cliffhanger they left us. I hate cliffhangers. And finally, what I think is the most gut-wrenchingly painful scene in the episode is when Sister Mary, the nun, the teacher, is taking the ruler to Teonna's hands, the girl, the student. It just became really hard for me to watch. And we see everybody has their breaking point. Abuse beats us down, but in most people, there's a tiger inside of us that rises up. And Teonna shows that strength. She shows that tiger. And you could tell this scene was not the only time they had this kind of interaction where Sister Mary would use the ruler to try to intimidate and get them to learn. She's obviously just making excuses and using the education system as a cover for her abuse, her sadistic abuse. And it was very satisfying to see her get the same treatment by the father in the office, except then they flip it right around where Teonna takes another beating, and we don't get to see much of that, but oh my goodness, then it's like Teonna just can't win. She was proven right. She got her teacher to experience the same level of pain that she experienced, that's that whole revenge, that thirst for revenge, and she got it. But then she got another beating from somebody else, and then Sister Mary, showing that she has not changed, just continues to show that really psychotic, sadistic side, and conducts the bath in a way that Teonna has to rub those wounds and cause them to bleed even more. It's just, it's horrifying. So who knows where Teonna's character is going? Who knows where Sister Mary's character is going? But they have established a very much a rival between these two characters. But they've also, for the most part, they've established this pattern of abuse and trauma, and then the PTSD that'll probably come from that later. So overall, I loved both episodes. So much psychology, so much I didn't even get to. What did you think of the episodes? And what do you want me to focus on more in the future? I want to hear from you. I want it to be a two-way thing. So subscribe, and together we'll figure out, hey, what parts did I leave out? Because there's so much stuff that I could have mentioned. But I'd love to hear your reactions, your thoughts, and let's take this journey together.